Okay. The third reason why supply curves might slope up on the long run is that input costs might rise with output. The more output you produce, the higher input costs may rise. Okay? So what we've assumed here in our entire discussion, going back at least one lecture, if not two, is we've assumed fixed input prices. Remember we said the wage was $5 an hour and capital was $10 a unit. Okay? We assumed those prices were fixed. But in reality, those prices aren't fixed. In reality, inputs come from markets. And those markets are themselves susceptible to the same kind of pressures that our output markets. Okay? So what might happen is as a firm produces more and demands more of an input, that input might get more expensive, raising the minimum average cost. So to see that, let's go to figure 11.5. Here we have the market for labor. The amount of labor on the x-axis, the wage on the y-axis. And we've got some initial equilibrium of L1 hours of labor being provided at a wage W1. Now, let's say that production increases in the market. So let's say this is the PC market. And suddenly more people want workers who can produce PCs. Well, we talked before about why the supply curve for labor is upward sloping. Right? We talked about the supply curve for labor is upward sloping. So as a result, if you want more workers to make PCs, you're going to have to pay them a higher wage. Right? If you want to shift out the demand for workers to make PCs, you're going to have to, as shift that demand out, you're going to have to pay a higher wage to get more of those workers. Well, what does that mean for you, the firm? Well, now let's look at figure 11.6. Okay? You, the firm, are initially in equilibrium at little e1. You're producing quantity little q1 at little price p1. Now let's say there's a big shift. Now let's say you want to produce more because there's profits to be made. Well, as you want to produce more, you've got to hire more workers. As you have to hire more workers, you have to pay more per worker. That means your cost curves have just shifted. Your average costs and marginal costs have now shifted up. Why? Because the input price has shifted. If you go back to our derivation of a supply curve, and if you raise the wage, you should see that we get a higher marginal cost, therefore a shifted up supply curve. The marginal cost is the cost you produce in the next unit. If you're paying higher input prices, that cost is higher. Likewise, the average cost, the total cost of you producing a PC. If you're paying higher wage, that total cost, remember your total cost is C equals WL plus RK. If W goes up, your costs go up. Okay? So those cost curves shift up from 1 to 2. And therefore, you are going to produce at a higher price. If you want to produce a higher quantity Q2, you're going to need to charge a higher price. Okay? And therefore, the market supply curve slopes up. The market supply curve slopes up because as we move towards more firms producing more units, that is going to raise the underlying cost of the labor they have to pay. And that's going to raise their minimum average cost. So minimum average cost is actually essentially rising. You get this upward sloping supply curve. Okay? So basically, that is, those are some reasons why this might not be true, why you might not get perfectly flat long-run supply curve. But let's back up and focus on the bottom line lesson here. The bottom line lesson is with identical firms and without these problems, entry and exit drive profits to zero and drive you to a flat long-run supply curve at minimum average cost. These complications mean that it won't quite always happen exactly that way. But there will be that pressure if there's profits to be made for entry or if there's losses for exit. Okay? Questions about that?